this was no boating accident. It wasn't a propeller, it wasn't a coral reef, and it wasn't Jack the Ripper. It was a 45. Hey guys, just an opinion here at the range on a beautiful fall Sunday morning. So I'm here with another installment of the 45 ACP Slug-fest. And no Slug-fest conversation is really ever going to be complete until we start focusing specifically on some of the better carry gun options in 45 ACP. 45 ACP has seen a bit of a resurgence in the last few years as far as popularity, not only for range and competition, but also for personal carry. Innovations that have made these pistols smaller, more reliable, easier to operate, and so forth have really helped bring the 45 ACP back into the forefront of concealed carry options. So let's look at a couple today. One, the Springfield Armory XDs 45 ACP. This particular copy is the original 3.3 inch. I've had it since just about the time it came out. I've had this gun for a couple years. It is wearing a Talon rubberized grip, which has been on it almost since it was brand new, and to me is a incredibly important piece of this package. And I'm going to compare that one today to wait, there should be two guns here if I'm going to do a comparison. Oh wait, here's the other one. The other one is the Glock 30S, and this one happens to be today's carry gun. The Glock 30S is relatively new. It's about a year old, a year and a half maybe, offering from Glock, and it's kind of a hybrid. It's kind of a Franken Glock, but it's a relatively high capacity 45 carry option. So we're going to look at these two guns and we're going to contrast and compare. But most importantly, I want to shoot them. 45 ACP Slug-fest, Concealed Carry Edition, Springfield XDs 45 3.3. You want to carry a concealable 45 ACP and not sacrifice capacity? Glock 30S. All right, so for comparison purposes, let's weigh each of these pistols, and I'm going to weigh them loaded because that's how you're going to carry them. I don't know about you guys, but I usually, if I'm going to carry a pistol, I carry it loaded. So there's no point really weighing them empty, and those numbers are easy enough to look up. But what I'm going to do is weigh them full loaded magazine without a round in the chamber. I mean, I love you guys, but I'm not going to break all my own safety rules. So the chamber is empty and the magazine is full. So that's going to be the situation for both. So first, the Glock 30S. 1 pound, 13.5 ounces. Now, the Springfield XDS, I'm going to do 2 different ways. First, the 5-round flush magazine, fully loaded, again, empty chamber. 1 pound, 9.1 ounces. Now, we'll go to the extended 7-round magazine. 1 pound, 12.1. Now let's do some trigger pull measurements. Start with the Glock 30S. We're going to do 10 pulls each and take an average. Okay, so for the Glock, we have an average of 7 pounds and 11 ounces. Okay, now we will clear that. We will do the Springfield XDS, 10 pulls. Okay, so a 10 pull average for the XDS, 5 pounds, 8 ounces. So the trigger pull for both of these guns is noticeably different according to the trigger pull gauge. Definitely favors the XDS. And that is in line with and in agreement with what my finger feels when I shoot both of these guns right now. Now, I will throw out the caveat, for whatever it's worth, that I've got about twice as many rounds through the XDS as I do through the Glock 30S. So the Glock 30S is probably, we're still talking about only like 300 rounds. So it's probably still within that break-in period. I expect that trigger, after you hit 500 rounds or so, is probably going to lighten up a little bit. But it is a little on the stiff side. It feels a little stiff when I shoot it, and I think for that reason, that's one of the reasons why, at least the other day, I was shooting the XDS a little better. Now, I could take both of these guns out next week and shoot the Glock better. So there's a lot of subjectivity to that. But same shooter, same day, that's about as good as you can do in terms of comparing. So let's look at these 2 triggers and try and be as objective as possible. There's a lot of subjectivity when you're talking about triggers. Different people like different feels. Some people, the Glock trigger is about as good as it gets, and there's nothing better for a lot of folks. And for a lot of folks, there are, the crisp 1911 trigger is as good as it gets, and so on. So let me try to just demonstrate the 2 triggers. Move one gun out of the way a little bit, and let's zoom in on the XDS. Both the Glock and the Springfield have a very similar trigger in terms of mechanisms. They both have the trigger safety. Both trigger safeties function very, very much the same way. They're designed very similarly. So there's a lot in common with them. But they do have a very different feel when you shoot them. If you shot both of these, if you shot both brands, regardless of these specific guns, you probably know what I'm talking about. One of the first things that you're concerned about as a shooter is what's the take up on the trigger. Take up is how far do I have to pull the trigger before I start to actually move mechanisms inside. Right? Now with a striker fired gun, there's not a whole lot that has to be moved. You're doing very little, if any, final cocking. So you just get to where you feel that tension before you're going to release that striker, right? So in this case, I'm just going to show you. Here's the full trigger. I start to pull, and that's my take up. That much. And that's not a whole lot. And then right now I'm at full tension. So if I continue to pull, it breaks. There's a bit of a long break to the Springfield XDS, but it's very smooth. And this is also certainly bears mentioning, this is the post-recall XDS. This gun did go back to the factory and got fixed. And the trigger definitely feels different. To me, it feels better. It feels smoother. It feels crisper, especially with the reset. Now, the reset, I'm holding the trigger all the way back. I just ran the slide, so that recocks the pistol, simulates live fire. And now, let that trigger go back, which it wants to do by spring tension, to just the point where it resets. Right there. In a lot of guns, you can hear that click. The Springfield's good at it. The Glock is probably the most famous for the reset click. All right, that's your distance. And now we're right back where we were when we're at the break point. All right, there's no sponginess here. There's no slack to take up, and we could break another shot. So basically, you have initial take up, you have the break, and then you have reset. All of those are very, very good in this pistol. Better since the recall, in my opinion, than they were initially. This trigger feels lighter, it feels smoother, and it feels crisper to me post-recall. I found it to be a little stiff, and actually the trigger safety irritated my finger. It was so stiff initially. But after the recall, I actually enjoy shooting this gun a lot. Now, that's the XDS. Now let's take a look at the Glock 30S. Again, we have our trigger safety. Very similar design, very similar construction. Now, our take up, that. Go back, take up, there. Very similar. I haven't measured either one of these to compare them, but going by rule of thumb, I'd say they're very, very close in the take-up stroke. So take-up distance looks close for both pistols, and now to break the shot on the Glock, very crisp, very tactile, firm, very firm. And we saw the measurements. We know that this is a little heavier trigger pull. Run the slide. Let's see what the reset looks like. Let the trigger come back under spring tension. Right there. You heard it. Very short reset. Shorter than the XDS. And you're back to the break point. I'd say it's about 1/8 of an inch. All right, so full trigger stroke, we have our take up, our break, and reset. So in terms of the triggers on both of these guns, I would say that they are fairly evenly matched and fairly comparable. Right now, I'm liking the XDS better. I'm just shooting it better. It feels smoother to me. It feels lighter. and it's got a nice. It's not as crisp as the Glock, but it's that smoothness kind of makes up for it. It's not as tight as the Glock, so I'm shooting this gun better because I'm enjoying that trigger a little bit more right now. So let's just do some general size comparison between these two pistols. When you talk to people about carry guns, they talk about size and capacity. Reliability and dependability better be a given. All right. So if you've got to weigh the pros and cons about reliability and durability between two guns, you better pick two different guns. Our decision is going to be based on size versus capacity. That's really it, isn't it? It's it's like the risk versus reward. It's the eternal argument in concealed carry pistols: size versus capacity. We'd love to have a 20 round tiny Derringer, but that doesn't exist, and it can't exist in reality. So everything else is a compromise. Then you add to it that we've decided, to be 45 ACP snobs, and we have to carry a 45 ACP. Well, now we challenge ourselves even better with the capacity versus size, because the size of the cartridge is so big. So you can see the length pretty well here. I've got these two guns laid side by side, back of the slide to the back of the slide. And let's see, if I only had some type of device to give these some scale. Oh, wait. Could probably use one of these. All right, so just to give you an idea, going to the front of the 30S, we're looking at just about 7 inches overall length, and that would be all the way at the bottom of the grip is the longest between here and here. The slide itself is about 6 3/4 on the light side. Now the XDS is just over 6 inches, call it 6 1/4 to the end of the grip tang. And the pistol grip doesn't really extend any further than that. So 6 1/4 overall length here, and you want to call that 6 3/4 to 7 overall length. So obviously the Glock 30S is a longer gun. It is also a thicker gun, and that should come to no surprise. If you're just now learning that from watching this video, then you don't get out much. So the Glock is definitely a thicker gun, and it's mathematically it's not that much thicker. It's like 1 1/8 or less than 1 1/8 in thickness, whereas the XDS is an exact 1 inch. But that goes to the most extreme point. So on both of these pistols, it's probably going to be the slide stop release. The other measurement that is important if you carry is the height of the pistol, and you can see that the two of these extremely even in that respect. Now caveat time comes, right? So let's put in magazines, empty magazines into empty pistols. Empty 5-round magazine. This is our flush mount 5-round magazine. And now they're not quite as even anymore, are they? That Glock magazine is tall enough that it adds about, probably close to 1/4 of an inch. And of course, if we want to carry our XDS with the extended magazine, well then, that's a whole different thing, isn't it? I don't know of anybody really offhand that carries them with the extended magazine. I take that back. I know at least one person who does, but most people carry this with the 5-round magazine. Now what you might do is carry the 7-round extended magazine as a spare. And you can also do that without that grip sleeve. So that makes it thinner to carry and conceal. So something to definitely something to think about as an option. You don't have to have that grip sleeve on it to use it. If you carry, you know that thickness is an important dimension, right? So comparing these two pistols side by side, you can see how much thicker the Glock is. Again, this really should come as no big shock because the Glock is a double stack 45. The XDS is a single stack 45. Right? Now what I find in reality is that that extra thickness is not as much as you would think. Let me drop this mag. It's significant, but it's not a game breaker. It's a game changer, but it's not a game breaker. That thickness is not quite as much as you would think in terms of making your decision for you. What I find though is a lot of times it's going to be, well, these are the clothes I'm wearing, and therefore one versus the other. A lot of times, based on ability to conceal, ability to comfortably carry that thickness. Really, what it comes down to. So there's our side-by-side length from a top view. And again, the length is really the least important measurement. That little bit of extra length is negligible. So pretty comparable in size. Again, the XDS is incredibly small. And if you don't know that firsthand, you owe it to yourself to go to a gun store and just say, let me pick that thing up and hold it. Because you really have to know how small that is. One of the other things to look at with the two are just the different sights. And you're looking at the way they both come standard and stock without any kind of upgrades. The Glock has the standard underdog sight on the rear and front dot, polymer. The XDS's rear sight also has combat dots, but it's also nicely serrated to reduce glare. The front sight on the XDS is a filament, fiber optic filament or light pipe. It comes with the red installed, but they also provide a green if you wanted to change it, and I think they actually give you some extra red as well. So you can change that to green, or you can replace the red when it wears out, whatever. Also, the rear sight has a nice snag-free design. The sights are steel on the XDS. They are polymer on the Glock. And again, this is just your basic entry-level sights on the Glock. That's your standard. So what about another important metric or measurement? What about accuracy? The Glock 30S, the target you see here, from just a rest at 10 yards, this is 20 rounds. The maximum spread, and that's actually these two rounds right here. That's the widest area. 2.579. Just a little over 2.5 inches. So that brings us to the XDS. The XDS on this given day performed better. The largest spread is these two shots right here, and that was 2.070. Just a hair over 2 inches. And that is 14 rounds, so slightly fewer rounds. And that just came down to magazine capacity. I shot 2 full 7-round magazines through this pistol. And so we've got this group, which is extremely tight. And again, my orange dot obviously was my point of aim. And you can see point of aim, point of impact, super, super good for the XDS at 10 yards. Okay, so on this day, with these two guns and this shooter, slight advantage to the XDS. That's this group up here. When it comes to 45 ACP, you have a lot of choices. And when it comes to 45 ACP for concealed carry or personal defense, you still have a lot of choices. But there's no doubt about it that two of the primary choices today are the Springfield XDs, the Glock 30S. And I'll tell you what, you're not going to be underpowered, underarmed, or under-equipped with either of these two guns. Yeah, there's some differences. Out of the box, the Glock 30S is going to offer a little bit more capacity, standard 10 rounds. Also can use the Glock 21, Glock 41 magazine, holds 13 rounds. So you have a lot of capacity with the Glock 30S. The XDS, standard magazine is 5 rounds. The extended magazine that you see in the gun right now, 7 rounds. So 7 plus 1 is as good as you're going to do. So you've got a little less capacity with the XDS, but I'll tell you, what you make up for it with is thinness, shortness. This is a small gun. If you've never actually picked up and held a Springfield Armory XDS, you need to do that just to astound yourself with just how small these pistols really are. And again, this has the extended magazine. The flush magazine makes the pistol look a lot more like that. But at 1 inch thick, it's really, really thin. The Glock 30S, you know, for a Glock, which is, you know, a lot of people pronounce it block, is a relatively thin pistol. The slide is about 1 inch. You get a little bit more, you go to about 1 1/8 inches when you add in the controls and the thick parts of the frame. The grip is definitely beefier, but that also gives you a little more stable platform when shooting. You have good pinky rest here with the magazine extension, which you don't have with the flush mount magazine on the XDS. There are some trade-offs. There are pluses and minuses both ways. What it really comes down to is deciding which of these features and which of these functions is the more important to you, making your choice based on that. Amazingly enough, both of these guns are very controllable to shoot, much more so than you might initially think for a 45 ACP pistol of this size, relatively lightweight, especially the XDS, much more controllable than you might think. Now, I have Talon rubberized grips on both of these, and to me, that's like a must-have. It really, really helps control these guns. Both of these guns are accurate. The Glock, obviously Glocks are accurate. The 30S is a very fine, very accurate pistol. The Springfield XDS, surprisingly accurate. At the range today, the XDS actually shot a tighter group than the 30S. You are not underarmed with either one of these pistols. And if you don't want to take my word for it, ask these guys behind me.